More now on fee-paying schools and parents mobilising against Labour's plans to levy VAT on school fees. Joining us now to talk about this is University Challenge star and maths teacher Bobby Seagull, along with political commentator Benedict Spence. And for the record, Gareth and I went to state school and fee-paying school, and we're not going to tell you who, but we are fairly balanced on the topic. What's wrong with it?
I think, well, there's a couple of things wrong with it. The first thing is that it sort of sets the precedent that education is sort of anything like anything else. Whereas the reality is that education, where possible, should be made as easy and affordable and accessible for everybody. Now, I don't think anybody would argue...
But it is.
I don't think anybody would argue that our system is exactly perfect, because actually our state school system is run not unlike our NHS. It's almost a bit of a postcode lottery. So some state schools are better than others, and that's sort of very unfairly distributed. Some children have needs that can't be met by the state system, and that's actually where the private system does come in and do very well. But we're not actually talking about that. We are talking predominantly about the sort of the upper middle classes and the elite who send their children to the sort of the top schools, and that sort of comes with the top education, but also the sort of the top networking opportunities. That's what most people sort of think about when they think about private education, and I think that obviously is where Labour are focusing on this, and this is why it's very popular, because there is that perception that it will tax the richest. Ultimately, that's never an unpopular idea, is that we're going to tax the rich, but it's not going to be those people that are affected by this. It's going to be the middle classes, the lower middle classes, the strivers. It's going to be people who get in on scholarships and bursaries, because this will inevitably drive fees up. It will mean that a lot of more affordable private schools will go out of business. The only other example where this has happened in Europe was in Greece, where they introduced a 23% rate of VAT, and exactly what is being predicted might happen in the UK happened there. Actually, there was an influx of people into the state system, which then couldn't cope. It didn't raise the money that they thought it was going to, and they ended up having to reverse it.
There are 7% of school kids in this country in fee-paying schools versus 93% in state schools. And Labour says it wants to spend more on state schools, hence it's not levying VAT, it's removing the tax break from what are not charities, but they are businesses. Because let's be clear, a lot of private schools, they have offshoots in the Far East, they make a lot of money. So why should they get tax breaks like charities do?
I mean, they don't run at massive profits like they're some sort of corporation. Actually, that money does get reinvested back into the education. And ultimately, we also have to be aware here that part of the reason why British schools do very well overseas is because of the reputation. Actually, our public school system, as it's known, rather than the private school system, is a massive source of soft power in the UK. And if you look actually about around the world, where is it that billionaires from overseas or politicians or anybody actually they desire to send their children to? It's not American schools, it's not Swiss schools, it is predominantly the English public school system and the Scottish private school system. That is a tremendous source of influence, and it's why we're able to open up offshoots in places like Singapore or Abu Dhabi. And again, people might look at it and go, it's a bit unsavoury, but it's a reality of the world, and it does really help in terms of fostering ties overseas.
You say about the reality of the world. What is the reality of the world in the classroom, though, Bobby? Because, you know, the hope from the Labour Party is that this will fund a better experience in state schools. Will that be the case?
So, again, what we've seen is that over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the educational inequality has been widening. This measure here, I see as a small step in a long journey towards having a more meritocratic society. And again, this debate is not about whether private schools are a good or a bad thing. That's a separate discussion. I think it's more about, do they deserve their VAT exemption? I think what we're saying is, no, they don't deserve that VAT exemption. And again, if you think about what education is for, it's trying to make sure that the UK as a whole has the best quality people, the most enlightened workers, the best output. And if that's going to truly happen, is we need to think about the 93 to 94% of the population of the country. And again, as a teacher, again, I'm someone as a student, I've been to a state school till 16, I grew up in a county state, but I went to Eton on a scholarship for my last 2 years of A-level. So I've seen the discrepancy in the quality.
You're Prime Minister then.
Yeah, watch out, Keir Starmer.
Not another one.
But I've seen the discrepancy in education, and I think it's about trying to make sure that we give opportunities for everyone. And again, what you said to me, Benedict, is the families that are paying maybe £10,000, £15,000, those ones that will get most penalised, not the ones going to Eton. But on the flip side, £10,000 to £15,000, my students in my school could never dream of getting that additional.
And that is a thing. We kind of talk about affordability crisis for kind of lower middle class parents, but the reality is they're not sending their kids to school hungry because they don't have enough money to pay for a decent meal. And that is the the affordability crisis that is happening in some state schools.
They are, that is true. But this isn't so much, that isn't the fault of private schools or public schools so much. That is the fault of government allocation of resources. And this is another part of the question, is how much is this going to raise? Because, of course, you have different competing think tanks and different politicians.
Anywhere between 1.5 and 2.5 billion.
No, that's what some people are saying, and other people are saying that it could cost up to 1.6 billion. And
that is Institute of Fiscal Studies, and most people agree they're reasonably independent.
Yeah.
I don't
one
know.
argument I've seen Benedict is people say, oh, if we remove the exemption from VAT, we're going to get a flock of people from the private to the state sector.
IFS is saying somewhere between 3 and 7%.
Yeah, over several years. And that could impact maybe 100 to 300 million to state schools, but actually there'll still be a net benefit of like 1.3 billion.
But that's just the IFS. That's just one person saying, well, one organisation saying that. There are others, the AIEA, ASI, and we can argue about what it is that their biases might be, but they say the opposite. They say that it will cost money. And the only thing that I would say on that is the only example we have to go on, if you want evidence of how this works, is what happens in Greece, where the worst-case scenario did happen, and it ended up costing the government money, and they had to reverse this process.
Do you think Greece is a very fair comparison? Greece, we know, has been bankrupt for many, many decades.
I don't really think that that's fair to say that just because Greece's economy is not in a good situation. I mean, our economy is not in a great situation. That is why the government is having to try to rob money from some places to pay other people. I don't think it's not necessarily.
Greece historically was not brilliant at collecting taxes, full stop, which is why they had problems of their own.
I mean, that's something that the Labour government argues the Conservatives have not been particularly good at either. I think that's worth pointing out.
Did you go to fee-paying school yourself?
I went to both.
Does this feel like the politics of envy? Because that's what a lot of people with a background like yours think Labour are doing.
I think that the way that they are selling it is to try and make it as though it is the politics of envy. I'm not sure that it is. I think if this were truly about the politics of envy, Labour would be a lot more sort of naked in their enmesh and say, we're just going to get rid of private schools. And I actually, in some ways, I'd respect that more than a policy that may or may not raise a very small amount and widen the inequality between the middle classes and the super rich, for whom this is not going to affect at all.
Schools could absorb the VAT. They don't have to pass it on to parents. But I want to finish, Bobby, on this wider issue of fairness and representation. 2/3 of the cabinet went to fee-paying school. More than half the judiciary went to fee-paying school. Half of diplomats went to fee-paying school. Are we missing, as a country, the opportunity of getting better talent in the bigger jobs?
I think completely. Again, a phrase I always tell my students and other teachers is, talent is equally distributed, but in this country, opportunity is not equally distributed. And again, if we're trying to get the best from all the talent in the UK, whether they're from private or independent or state schools, we need to make sure that opportunity is really spread. And currently, the way the country works, sadly, is that 7% of the population get the majority of the benefits of this country.
Benedict, we are out of time, Benedict. I'm so sorry. A bit to
see me.
I know, I can see Benedict.
That's all right, all right.
I can tell. Appreciate you both coming in and talking about that. A heated debate, no doubt, and one will continue whatever happens on Thursday. Anyway, it is just 2 days to go until the general election. The parties are focusing